Hello, welcome to the regular meeting of Brisbane Planning Commission, Thursday, March 23rd, 2017. Oh, is it not on?
Is the light on?
Lights on.
Hi, okay, there we go. Welcome to the regular meeting of Brisbane Planning Commission, Thursday, March 23rd, 2017, 7:30 p.m., Brisbane City Hall, 50 Park Place, Brisbane. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Anderson,
Present.
Commissioner Doe,
Present.
Commissioner Mackin,
Here.
Commissioner Manier.
Here.
The record show Commissioner Cunningham is absent.
Okay, may we have a motion to adopt the agenda, please?
I make a motion to adopt the agenda as is.
I'll second that motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, on to consent calendar. Please note the items listed here as consent calendar items are considered routine and will be acted upon collectively by one motion adopting the Planning Department's recommendation unless a member of the public, the commission, or its staff asks to remove an item to discuss it. Prior to the motion, the chairperson will ask if anyone wishes to remove an item from the consent calendar.
I think in the number 2 item, the California Code Section 65402, I think should be discussed a little bit for the clarity of the people. So I think we should move that out of the consent calendar.
Is that agreeable with everyone?
I motion to do as Jamil mentioned and move item 2 out of the consent calendar.
Okay. So, with the removal of number 2, we have the approval of draft action minutes. Is that agreeable with everyone?
Yeah, we have
No
quorum
problem.
for both items.
Okay. So,
I
can
was
we?
not present for one, so
Let's see,
I
the
was
first
absent
one.
for the
The first one
February
was
9th
myself,
meeting.
Cunningham, Doe, and Mackin. So I'll move to approve the draft Brisbane Planning Commission minutes from February 9th.
Mhm. And
I'll second the motion.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And March 9th?
And I'll also make a motion to approve the draft Brisbane Planning Commission minutes from the March 9th meeting, which were myself, Cunningham, Manier, and Mackin were present.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. So on to oral communications, which is limited to 15 minutes. Does anyone in the audience want to address the commission on issues not on the agenda? No? Okay. Seeing none, we're going to move on to written communications, and I have received no written communications. Does anyone want to share anything they've received?
I don't have any.
Okay. So,
Madam Chairman, since you did pull item number 2, we'd like to dispense with that before we get into old business, if
Okay.
that's the
yes, please.
pleasure of the commission. Would you, you want a very brief staff report, or you just want to ask questions on the matter? Would you like a brief
I
staff
think the
report?
staff report will be appropriate.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay.
So just earlier this month, the San Mateo County requested that the city provide a general plan conformity review. This is per government code that when a public entity is acquiring land, that there's essentially a review by the Planning Commission to certify essentially that it is the use that's intended for that land is in conformance with the general plan. This one's pretty straightforward. It's essentially it's a land use designation in the general plan that's open space, and that is the intent of the county is to acquire this land for dedication to open space, and so that'll be under their management. It's owned currently by McKesson Properties, so fairly straightforward, just a quick review of conformity, and it matches, and so it's before you tonight.
Is it possible to show the slides for the viewers at home?
Well, I don't have slides. If you wanted something on the overhead, we could
okay.
potentially do that. Is that not working?
We'll try to pull it up on the overhead here.
Okay.
We are having technical difficulties with the overhead here.
Sorry to go through this motion, but I think it will be appropriate for the people at home watching the know which one we talking about. So that
For those interested, it's also in the memorandum that was attached to today's agenda. So if you pull up on the website, you'll be able to pull the documents that we're referring to as well. And it's dated March 23rd, 2017, Government Code Section 65402.
So yes, thank you, Julia. This is the general plan land use map with the subject area circled in red. It's hard to detect the color there, but you could see the handwritten subject area, and that is open space. It wraps around the Northeast Ridge residential development area. And we could flip to that is the northernmost of the two parcels, and then this is the southern parcel, so that is adjacent to Crocker Park. You can see the larger parcels with the numbers on them. Those are the end of Crocker Park, and then going back, you can see the subdivision of the Northeast Ridge there.
so they will become the part of San Bruno Mountain
That's correct.
Conservation. Are they also part of the CHP right now?
They are part of the Habitat Conservation Plan already.
HCP, I mean, not
HCP, that's correct.
Okay. Big difference.
And that's pages D.2.7 all the way through to D.2.9 for those following in the packet.
Thank you very much. That clarifies everyone. I hope understand where they are located. With that, maybe I can make a motion to go ahead and approve that. Yeah, my mic is on. Speak louder.
Or closer.
Closer. Okay.
I think we're too far back.
Okay.
So with that, should we go ahead and adopt the consent calendar as presented?
No, you already pulled it off the consent calendar, so this will take a separate motion to approve item 2. So I think Commissioner Menier was making a motion to approve.
Okay.
Okay. So I make a motion to approve the Government Code Section 65402 General Plan conformity review of a proposal by the County of San Mateo to acquire approximately 18 acres within the city of Brisbane for park purposes.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye. Thank you.
Okay. On to old business. Continue public hearing of 219 Tulare Street, R-3 Residential District. Grading review EX-1-17. Grading review for 421 cubic yards of soil cut to accommodate construction of a new single-family home on a vacant 3,000 square foot upslope lot. Fred Herring and Worley Incorporated is the applicant. Teresa Ruiz Fong Trust is the owner. APN is 007-361-210. Staff report, please.
Yes, good evening, Chair and Commission.
Good evening.
So the request before you tonight is for a grading permit review for 421 cubic yards of soil cut and export from a lot identified as 219 Tulare Street, currently a vacant lot, intended to accommodate construction of a new single-family home. Just to orient you to the site, here's some site photos. So it's a narrow lot. I believe it's 30 feet in frontage. And you can see at the front of the rock outcropping in the front of this picture, it's actually part of the public right-of-way. So the front property line is located about 18 feet beyond the improved portion of Tulare Street. So just think about that as you consider The grading that you are reviewing is for the grading on the property itself. There would also be grading associated with the public right-of-way improvements, which are not under your purview tonight.
But that will be done by the
City engineer,
city engineer.
correct.
So the city will bear the cost for that?
No, the private developer will bear the cost. You just aren't considering the grading associated with that work tonight.
Okay.
So here is a site survey showing the existing contours on the site and the proposed layout of both the structure, the driveway access from Tulare Street, as well as a off-street parking space. Oh, sorry.
No,
Thank you for reminding me. I'm so sorry, Greg.
Yes.
Commissioner
I
Anderson.
should move down
you-
there at this point in time.
Actually, recusal, you'll have to leave the room.
Oh, I can't be in the room.
No.
Oh.
I'm so
Yeah.
sorry. Thank
No,
you.
I know that. I just thought that I could stay in the room.
Sorry about that.
Go be in another room. Anywhere.
Should we start all over again?
That was already said. It's in our packets.
Just, it was just an introduction, so that's good.
Thank you to my director. So the improvements in the right-of-way, like I mentioned, would be a driveway as well as off-street parking space. The applicant is also proposing an access stairway in the public right-of-way, which again would all be subject to approval by the city engineer as it's a private improvement in the public realm. And here is the preliminary grading plan. So again, this shows the footprint of the grading on site, which is generally limited to the footprint of the home as well as the rear garden terrace area. For the most part, the natural contours would stay exactly the same of the land surrounding the structure. There are some minor, I think, grade changes in the upper portions of the site, but for the most part, the natural contours would remain the same.
Except in the site area where they're going to grade, right?
Except in the footprint of the structure, right. And here's some photos of a model that I believe the applicant has brought with him tonight to demonstrate how the structure would fit within the hillside. Some different side views and as well as a look at actually how the structure would fit. And you can see how it's actually, the natural contours of the site, again, will remain basically as they are right now, and the house will sit right within the hillside. So in order to recommend approval of a grading permit, the commission has to make several findings, which I've detailed in the staff report. The first is which the proposed grading is minimized and is designed to reflect or fit comfortably within the natural topography. So again, as I stated before, the applicant has provided a grading program that would limit the excavation to just the footprint of the home. The structure would fit within the hillside, maintaining the natural contours to the side and rear lot lines. This is a challenging site. It has about a 36% slope upward from Tulare, and again, as I mentioned, it's the front property line is set back significantly from the paved right-of-way. So considering those conditions that challenge development of this site, the grading program is very respectful of the natural topography that exists. The second finding is that the proposed grading is designed to avoid large exposed retaining walls. The applicant has designed the retaining walls such that none of them will exceed 6 feet in height from grade. In fact, for the most part, they will all be, I think, between 2 to 4 feet in exposed height from grade. Even though none of them will exceed the maximum height limit imposed by our zoning code, we are still recommending conditions that screening plantings be installed just to soften that look to neighboring properties, since the walls themselves will go up the entire length of this structure. And the other thing I wanted to mention is the driveway walls will be about 10.5 feet at their tallest, I think. Again, that's all within the public right-of-way, so I've recommended a condition of approval that you recommend the city engineer consider screening plantings in the right-of-way as well to soften the appearance of those tall walls. But again, they're not on the site itself, so our purview is a little bit limited as to what we can actually require. The last finding is that the grading is designed to conserve existing street trees or any protected trees, whether by their size or species as defined in our code. There are trees on this site. However, the applicant has designed his grading plan to avoid the root zones of these trees, which I believe are mostly pine. So no trees meeting this criteria would be impacted by the site grading. So with that, we are recommending conditional approval of the project by adoption of the draft resolution, subject to the findings and conditions of approval contained therein. And I'm happy to answer any questions if there's any.
Does anyone have any questions now?
I do, actually. I did visit the site. The plan actually looks very ingenious. And my concerns are about the grading and the trees that are being preserved, and I applaud the property owner's desire to retain those trees. But looking at the site and the plans, there are 3 trees on the northern side of the structure, and they're very, very close to an area that has to be graded quite deeply because of the slope. There's also 1 tree near the front on the southern part of the property. And I might add, none of these trees are in the 30-inch circumference. However, the one on the front, when I visited the site, appears to be part of either a group of trees, because one of the trunks there totally is over 30 inches, unless that happens to be on the neighbor's actual property.
Let's see if, I'm not sure if
That cluster,
the trees that you're seeing, okay.
you've got an arrow on
may
the
be,
figure
yeah.
on the left, you've got an arrow. And if you visited that, you see that it almost looks like a stand of trees, or it's all part of the same tree. It's really hard to tell unless I hiked up the hill, which I chose not to do.
Mm-hmm.
But my concern here as well, in that all of this grading, when you look at the setbacks on the front side, if I go by the scale, and I'm used to reading plans, is within about 2 feet of the steps leading up to the porch. And on the north side, the grading is within about 3 feet, 2 feet, 3 feet, maybe 5 feet of the other 3. So I wondered if an arborist had been consulted, because my concern is twofold. We've just seen a lot of trees come down in the Bay Area with cycles of drought and heavy rain. Once you disrupt the roots, are you in fact creating a hazardous condition for the neighbor on the north side? Those trees could topple. They're pines, they're not all in really good shape, and I'm not trying to suggest favoring taking them down. I'd rather see them preserved, but if I don't know if a geotechnical engineer has examined the soil. There's also the concern about the stability of that slope when you cut into it that severely, because I would imagine historically these trees they're not really old, but they've been there long enough. They're stabilizing the hillside as well from erosion. So that would be my primary question, just out of concern for the neighbors and also the hillside stability.
Understood. So an arborist did not review these plans to analyze the impacts to the surrounding trees. Also, I want to note the geotech review will be required at grading permit stage. So there will be a soils report and a geotechnical analysis associated with grading permit application. But in regards to the stability of the trees, I think it's worth considering if it indeed is the property owner's wish to preserve these trees, and considering concerns for safety and stability, it could perhaps be a condition of approval that you guys require to have an arborist come out, survey, prepare a report with recommendations on how to best preserve those trees and protect their integrity.
The other question will be the integrity of the structure itself. Tree being so close to it, the root system, if you have a foundation next to it, it could cause problems with that also. So we have to keep that in mind, because larger trees like that, the root system go everywhere. It's, you know, and if you're going to cut all those roots, they will come back again and they will start to lift the structure. So anything that close to the structure, in my opinion, will not be a good idea to keep it. But I guess, again, we can get the opinion from the experts. And I'm glad that we got another engineer or the draft person on board,
You humble me.
which is good. I can see that, you know, it's really helpful in figuring out about the impact of those trees. I probably wouldn't have looked at that, but I'm glad that Colleen did that. And the other question I have is regarding the exposed retaining wall. You mentioned that it's 6 feet, but the others that are within the public right of way or
Taller.
they will be taller,
Mhm.
and we are required to review anything that's above 6 feet, but the city
Not
is,
not in a
city-
public right of way.
but the city is exempted from that requirement.
Well, for the most part, yes, in the public right of way.
Yes, that's correct. The zoning ordinance standards apply to private property. They don't apply to city right-of-way.
Okay, and if it's not applied to the city right of way, can maybe suggest something that even though it doesn't apply, but they should have some kind of a visual impact?
You can recommend any sort of treatment or anything for the city engineer to consider.
Because these are very tall retaining
Yeah.
walls. And also the type of retaining wall will determine too, because there are some that are very nice looking and the others not. And again, depending on the type of the retaining wall, it can be, the cost can be $10,000 to
Sure.
$50,000. So I don't know how far we can go with that. because-
Again, you can make a recommendation to the city engineer. We can't impose requirements.
Yeah.
So you can't require something, but you can recommend it.
Yes, because some of the retaining wall, you make it with the wood planks and all that, but
Right.
these tall ones, I don't think it will look that good. But, if you're going to put the structural element to that can run into a lot of money, and the lot next to mine, on Humboldt Road, when they did that retaining wall, they tried to mimic the actual rock formation. So I don't know whether that's going to be the case or not. And again, it will be paid by the applicant.
Well, it'll be the city engineer working with the applicant to determine what the best
The cost of-
material and
the cost,
method. And
because it can run into a lot of money. And
I don't dispute that.
yeah.
Okay.
Uh,
Any other questions?
I think that's in keeping, just for clarification, that's in keeping with the idea that you were suggesting that we suggest the trees to soften the effect for the part that goes
Right.
into the public right-of-way, correct?
You can recommend that the city engineer require certain things that aren't required necessarily by his code. You can make recommendations for him to take into consideration.
Also, when you do the grading, that will be a portion of it is in the public right of way.
Correct.
So the grading that we're talking about is from,
The grading that
Please.
you are reviewing, which is the 421 cubic yards, is all within the property boundaries. That's what
okay,
you are
so
reviewing.
how the transition will occur?
So if we
between
go
the
back
public-
to, if you want to follow on the screen, is it showing up?
So
Yeah.
will that be a step upward or it's
So-
going to be a
So the driveway would be same grade as the existing roadway, unless there is some more road widening work I haven't been made aware of yet. It would slope upward from the street. You would also have the stairs that are proposed to go upward. So the actual entry level of the home is elevated. But the transition would be accomplished by the driveway and the stairs, more or less.
So the difference between the city road and the front of the house,
It'll be a rolled curb, I believe. Is that what?
how many feet that's going to be as it exists now? Because after the
I'm not sure I understand how many feet it'll be.
when you just leave the site as it is and then you cut the right of way, that's gonna be how many
There-
feet down?
So if you look, well, the retaining wall itself at its highest point is, and the applicant can correct me here if I'm incorrect, but I believe it's 10.5 feet at its tallest point. Is that?
So you're gonna
These questions may be better suited for the public hearing for the applicant to explain. But the retaining wall at the driveway would slope upward with the slope of the property from the right-of-way, which is obviously fairly low compared to the rest of the site, all the way up to where the structure begins at the garage.
because
The retaining wall would support that.
my concern is this is the road and this is the, when you cut that, now this is the site.
Right.
So
So that's would be
then
retained.
they have to go all the way from there up, and
Mhm.
they have to meet the standard slope requirement for the car.
14% slope is shown on the grading plan for the driveway.
So maybe I'll ask the applicant to those
Mhm.
questions.
May I ask one more question?
Mhm.
Considering the narrowness of the lot, which all the photographs belie when you see it, it's quite remarkable how narrow it really looks.
Yeah,
And considering cutting into that hillside, and this may have already gone past planning, was consideration given to alternate drainage? Because there's a significant amount of water has to come down, considering the slope. You're putting concrete into that and leaving very little on the edges. Are drainage plans incorporated into this?
So yes, they will be for a grading permit. It's not something we require at planning level review, but it is required for grading permit.
Okay.
So both the planning department and city engineer review the grading plans and drainage plans. We are required by our municipal regional stormwater permit to infiltrate and capture stormwater on the site to minimize runoff. So whatever system is ultimately designed, it would have to ensure that there is no runoff impacting neighboring properties or
there'll be catch basins and all that installed at the,
there's a variety of methods that the developer could opt to go with, but yeah, that's some of them.
Thank you.
I have one more question. Are there any endangered species or anything the survey will be done before the?
So I think it's a typical condition of approval for us to, first of all, this is an exempt project from CEQA. With mature trees, there's surveying that can be done within a certain period if trees are going to be removed between, I believe it's February to August. They have to require a
It's not within
survey.
the HCP or butterfly?
It is not within the HCP. It borders the HCP, but it's not within it.
Okay, thank you.
So are you ready for public hearing? Okay. Could we hear from the applicant, please?
We'll make a motion to
No, only when we close.
enter the.
Yeah.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Fred Herring. I'm the architect and will be the builder. Starting with your questions, there actually is a soils report. There's also a geotechnical engineer in my office. We're also the structural engineers for the project. So the rock face that you see there that's in the public right-of-way is an indication that it's a very stable place. I think those trees had a hard time getting started. I'm glad they're there, and I'm glad that the cut I'll be making is on the downslope side. So if they're ever going to go anywhere, it's toward the building we propose. And I have had an arborist look at them, although I don't have a full-blown report, and I'm used to having him come to the job when we make the mass excavation and recommend what do we do about the roots we're cutting and how do we nurture this tree so it stays there. This is a place where there really on that lot I'd say there aren't enough trees, but the ones that are there I'm planning on keeping. And what you referred to as a grove, that is over the property line the other way, though there's one beside the entry stair that is a single one. I hesitated for a long time too, but eventually I ran up that slope. So I've been there to see those trees. And they, given our long drought and that they're pines, they're in remarkably good condition. I mean, pine trees have really suffered in the long drought. So I think that answers some of your questions too. The retaining walls, of course, are all concrete walls. These are all have much too much of a load to be a wood wall. That wood wall,
Yeah.
I can't imagine anyone who could design one that wouldn't fail in that setting.
I've seen some, but
Yeah, but I bet they failed. You know? I have not built any. The actual grading quantity, when I calculated that 420 yards, that does include the driveway access, and it does, and there will be a road widening. Your question was how far was the face of the garage from the existing road, and the answer is about 20 feet, so that you can park there and not intrude on the street. And at the request of the city engineer, there's a piece kind of to the right of that sign there, where the road, where you now have parking places that intrude into the two lanes. There'll now be a parking place that's in the public right of way, but it's away from the current street. So
my concern was about the slope of the driveway.
of the driveway.
Itself.
Oh no, it has to be a gentle driveway. I mean, the town ordinance and any kind of reasonable
Yeah.
use insist on it. Can't be going up a precipice. It's a long way up to the house after you get there. As Julia said, the visual transition as you're driving by is in the two stages of stairs, one that's on the property and one that's in the public right of way. I built this little model so you get a sense. Maybe I can just hand it to you.
That would be fantastic.
You can
Thank
get
you.
a sense of how it fits into the hill. I mean, this is the kind of circumstance where you dig a huge hole, it looks like you have an open pit mine. It just looks terrible. And then you
Yeah.
fill the house in, and when you're done, the house looks like it belongs there. So it's a very low profile building compared to practically anything on upslope lots in town. But that's why, because you go in there and cut the big hole and then fill it with the house. But we don't cut beyond the house except in the very back for a terrace to get the sun from that side.
Yeah, I'm glad you did this way, because a lot of times they use the matchbox design.
Yeah, no, this is not
That one on the top of
Right.
the others, and this way you minimize the avenue following the contour of the.
very much so. Yeah.
And what's the height of the back retaining wall? Retaining wall in the back?
It's about 8 feet on the right-hand side where the stair goes up.
Uh-huh. Oh, it's about 8 feet, yeah.
And the part you were asking about in front of the garage where your left
Yeah.
is there.
Can you speak in the mic? We're losing you on.
Yeah.
The part you were asking about that's in the public right-of-way, it's on the uphill side of the driveway. And downhill, at that point, it joins an existing low retaining wall that's about 4 feet tall now. And from there, it rises up to reach just basically to follow grade.
Now, with this kind of configuration,
Yeah.
you will have enough light coming in, because some of it is sunk in.
A lot of it is subterranean,
Yeah.
but practically everything that's above the ground is a piece of glass. If you like,
Oh,
Oh,
it's like Legos.
that's nice.
Yeah, very nice.
I wish more people design like that. A lot of houses, they are just matchbox, one on top of the other. That's a usual
Yeah.
practice nowadays.
Wow, that's very nice.
Very nice. Thank you very much.
May I see that too?
Yeah.
Very nice. Thanks.
if you have any other questions, okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, may I have a motion to close public hearing, please?
We are open for
Oh,
the
well,
public.
I'm sorry. Did anyone want to make a comment? I was assuming everybody was like, oh, it's so nice. So. No? Oh, yes, okay. All right.
I actually haven't had enough time to look this over. I'm just a little, I think it's a really beautiful design. It's one of the first things I didn't see. I haven't hated as soon as I saw the paper. I'm a little concerned about the level of glazing on the west. That often contributes to overheating. But other than that, it looks great. I might, it's just, you don't have to take my opinion, but I think you have got too much glass in the west, because the one sun comes in low in the west and often causes overheating because you can't shade it very well, and the house is usually already warm by that point, so you usually want to not have quite so much western glass. That's all. Thanks.
It may make them feel like they're staying in Hawaii or Arizona.
Each his own. Okay, any other comments? No? Okay, do we have a motion to close public hearing, please?
I'd make a motion to close public hearing.
A second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Any further discussion?
I think I got all my questions answered. And
I would still advocate for an arborist report.
Yeah.
And I like the suggestion of the screening plantings for the retaining wall on the public right-of-way, because over 10-foot retaining wall's significant.
Yes.
And it's a beautiful area.
Mm-hmm. Any other recommendations? Commissioner Manier?
pardon me?
Any other recommendations?
No.
I think we agreed to that, right? Yeah. Okay. So can we make a motion?
I'd make a motion to adopt Resolution EX 1-17 for the grading of 219 Tulare Street with provisions for an arborist report and screening plantings for the retaining wall on the public right-of-way.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Congratulations. Okay. Okay, thank you. Welcome back. So on to study session, Northwest Bayshore General Plan Designation and Zoning. Discussion of the potential general plan and zoning consistency amendments, including the Northwest Bayshore General Plan sub-area with the M-1 manufacturing in the PD planned development zoning districts.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
First, by way of background, in November of 2015, City Council adopted Ordinance 599, which amended the M1 manufacturing zoning text to expand the permitted and conditional uses for the district. At the same time, they adopted a resolution of intent to initiate amendment for essentially general plan conformity in terms of the nomenclature, which refers to the M1 in different areas as different things, trade commercial actually for that southern area. Then just in January of this year, the Planning Commission had a study session on the M1 manufacturing zoning and the process going forward. And given the diverse nature of the district, the Planning Commission asked for a second study session, which is why we're here tonight, and that's for the Northwest Bayshore sub-area. In March, the Planning Commission had a public hearing and provided a recommendation to Council via resolution for the Southwest Bayshore M1 district to be rezoned to TC2. And staff anticipates having that draft ordinance to the Council probably late next month. So this evening's study session is to pick up following the January session and is focused just on the Northwest Bayshore sub-area. So the map shows it here, northwest, and then the southeast I just mentioned. The northeast is part of the Baylands sub-area, or Baylands EIR process that's going on right now with City Council. Just to highlight some background information on the Northwest Bayshore subarea, it's bounded by Guadalupe Canyon Parkway, Bayshore Boulevard, and then the Daly City Brisbane border. It's about 87 acres. Its general plan designation is Plan Development Subregional Commercial Retail Office. Kind of a mouthful there for PD SCRO. It also has a marsh area, and that's that marsh area is consistent. The zoning and general plan are consistent with each other. So the existing uses are at the south area, the Technology Park, which was completed around 2000. The central area is the vacant Levinson and Peking Handicraft areas. That's how those are referred to. Those are about 33 acres. And then the north area, which is the PG&E site and the 7 Mile House, which shares its parcel with V&A Auto Service at the very northeast corner of the sub-area. So this slide illustrates the inconsistency that we now have. This is current conditions. Specifically, the effort would be to address this inconsistency between the plan development, SCRO, land use designation in the general plan versus the manufacturing zoning. As we discussed in the last study session, this raised other questions about the general plan policy and the PD zoning, which also calls for a specific plan. And the idea was put forward to extend Crocker Park sub-area and that trade commercial zoning that exists to the south to include the Technology Park. As outlined in your agenda report, the preliminary direction that was put forward through the Commission's last study session was to recognize the diverse nature of the sub-area and prepare general plan and zoning amendments to better reflect its diversity and the city's vision for each of these areas going forward, and to clarify the implementation procedures for potential future development. So the south, central, and northern areas of the current Northwest Bayshore sub-area would be separated into smaller sub-areas for the north and central, and the south area would be incorporated into the larger Crocker Park sub-area. So I'll get into these in the next slides a little bit more. This slide provides a preliminary view of how the mapping for the general plan and the corresponding zoning amendments would play out. As you can see, both the general plan, land use designations, and zoning, of course, would be consistent in this scenario. The south would be remapped, again, to be Crocker Park. The plan development designation would be retained in the central area, and commercial utilities land use designation, commercial public utilities land use designation, and zoning would be established in the north. So focusing in a little bit more on each of these areas, again, the south area is about a 10-acre site. It was developed about 17 years ago as an R&D park with 3 buildings. These were built as planned development under the current zoning, and the uses and development there are consistent with the general plan and zoning that exists in Crocker Park to the south. So it is in conformity with the Crocker Park already. So again, the preliminary proposal will be to extend Crocker Park across Guadalupe Canyon Parkway. And this is essentially just a mapping task. And then the central area has not been developed, and so the PD SCRO land use designation and zoning would be retained as appropriate for these fairly large vacant parcels. The requirements for a specific plan would be removed from the general plan and zoning, given the redundancy with the plan development permit requirements and lack of clarity that this presents. Staff provided further information on specific plans in the agenda report. In brief, the state's specific plan statutory requirements are less detailed than the city's plan development permit requirements, and the role of the specific plan is not clear on the site-by-site basis as it would be applied here. Also, the sub-area would be renamed to distinguish it from Northwest Bayshore, which would retain the name in the area north of this at the PG&E site. So this new name would be Guadalupe Hills for this central area to reflect its geographic location. Also, as a note, this area is part of the San Bruno Mountain HCP, or Habitat Conservation Plan area for protection of endangered butterfly species. Given that status, environmental study work would be required consistent with CEQA to determine what, if any, mitigations may be required. In 2001, the city published the open space plan, which mapped the back portions of these parcels as potential open space. The configuration of any open space would be subject to further study prior to development. Finally, for the northern area, staff would suggest keeping Northwest Bayshore as a sub-area name, but the general plan land use designation would be narrowed to commercial uses as currently exist with the 7 Mile House and the auto repair facility, and to public utility-related uses. So this would be a commercial public utility land use designation in the general plan. The zoning development regulations would address the commercial versus public utility uses separately, and our preliminary draft of that zoning ordinance was prepared and included in your agenda report. These proposed amendments, while narrowing the uses, would allow for a more reasonable and streamlined permitting process. And the event that either 7 Mile House or PG&E sites were to apply for new facilities or significantly change their existing facilities. Note that there are provisions in the draft ordinance to apply design review and use permit processes for certain buildings or uses as well. And so with that, if there's any questions, be happy to take them or turn it over to the Planning Commission for discussion.
The question I have is regarding the PD-SCRO. Now, R in this list stands for retail, right? Not
Right.
residential.
That's correct.
Okay, so if you look at the page H 1.25, in that one, you mentioned potentially residential as part of mixed-use development under the general plan for Northwest Bayshore. Where did that come from? That's not part of the existing plan, is it?
So the general plan actually, although it's a little unusual, it's not listed per se in its title, but it includes residential as a considered use, but there's no development standards, density essentially that's listed in the general plan. So it's something that the general plan kind of nods to, if you will, but this could be a cleanup matter. And
so should we clarify this, that no residential development? Take this potentially residential. So what does potentially means anyway?
You could, I mean, that's a fairly substantive policy change from the 94 plan, but if that's something, commission, you want to recommend as a group, that's certainly your prerogative to recommend that. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of problematic in that it's sort of thrown out there, but there's no density or intensity standards, so it is kind of a little bit awkward to have it in that kind of sort of broad configuration without some sort of parameters. So, I mean, it certainly is something if you want to
not
address
only
that, you can.
The language here is potentially. What does that mean?
I agree. That's just right out of the 94 plan, so we did not.
So I think this is problematic for me. If you're changing it, then maybe we should clean this up too.
Why do you want to remove, why do you want to remove residential from Levinson and Peking.
Not the Levinson, but it's the area where Caltrain stations and all that. That's northwest area.
No, that's incorrect. Northwest is Levinson, Peking.
Levinson, PD. For Levinson, we are making it as an open space.
No,
No.
you're not.
Or-
Retaining the PD, you're retaining the current general plan designation as is essentially.
Yeah.
So you're not changing, we were not suggesting you change the general plan designation over the Levinson, Peking properties.
Okay, if you want to keep that as an option, but I still have a problem with potentially residential. I think that language is subject to a lot of interpretation. What does potentially means? Either it's a residential or not.
Potentially, but so why do you want to remove residential from Levinson?
Levinson, I thought that it was all along. We thought it's going to be an open space area. And
But that's not what we're zoning today, the proposal.
yeah, but
And
I
that's
think
quite a
there
different
was a
proposal.
lot of discussion about keeping that as an open space. And didn't we make a kind of a couple of meetings ago? Didn't we make a switch that in return we will have the Levinson property as a open space? I think there was.
That's not what our records reflect. It may have been discussed, but we didn't get the sense that was
I
the,
don't remember
direction
that being
of the-
discussed. I thought last time we discussed this, we were in favor of a potential commercial and or residential on Levinson and Peking.
Some reason I thought that we were, maybe I'm confused, but if I don't have any problem if you do want to keep it, but change the language here a little bit better. Potentially, I don't know. That can be subject to a lot of interpretation.
and just to clarify, I think there was some discussion of the open space plan. I think what Ken has pulled up that's showing that a portion of that Levinson property was shown in the open space plan as potential open space. But that would be determined as part of a development proposal, not by general plan designation. It's when a development proposal, they would look at the biological resources, and then as part of a PD permit, you would sort of define what those parameters are for open space retention or habitat preservation versus development.
Some reason I had the idea that we thought about it, but maybe I might be part of some other discussion. It's possible, yeah. Okay, so no problem. If I can change the language a little bit, we can leave it the same way.
Are you proposing to change it or leave it the same?
Yeah, I just want to take it out, the potentially residential as part of that. I have a problem with with keeping the language that subject to a lot of interpretation. Potentially to, in my opinion, will be one thing, but in somebody else's opinion might be different.
Well, I don't.
So I think
Potential residential, that means potential residential, and it just seemed like last time we talked about that, you were in favor, and I'm not saying you can't change your mind, but I was just wondering why.
well, I'll say in your eyes it is. There is a potential for residential there. In my eyes, there is no potential for residential there. So if you want to keep it as a residential, make it straightforward whether we should have a residential or not.
Well, I'm just wondering what your reasoning and why you think that there isn't a potential unbuildable, or you want to preserve it for the habitat.
No, it's
If you want
not,
to preserve
yeah.
for habitat, then you want to remove.
I thought
Commercial
that
as well.
I thought it was considered to be an open space at one point, the whole region, but now I'm not arguing on that point. All I'm saying is to clean up the language a little bit, so make it more one way or the other.
Okay, so
whether
you're
it's
not
gonna be-
opposed to residential, you just want to
No.
remove the word potential.
Right.
I'm fine with that.
Now, I'm not against the residential or anything. I thought that it was, for some reason, I thought it was already considered as a open space,
So
but I was wrong.
Although I think maybe the reason the word potential is in there is to imply that you need to go through the PD process, or I don't know, do you think that, does staff think that the word potential is important?
If it is important, then keep it, but.
I guess I'm as opposed to just saying that
As opposed to just saying residential, potential residential versus residential, I think.
what would the language, let's see what.
I'll
I actually tend to think that the potentially residential actually gives more of a safeguard as to procedural, whatever necessities that come into play when you propose a residential building there.
Yeah.
But-
So I'm thinking that actually it's not confusing to me, but, and I think that the current regulations will come into play as a default, and it'll set the parameters, or it becomes as a as-needed basis. So in my personal opinion, I would prefer to have potentially residential there than just residential. But
But in
I'm looking
case-
at it from another,
Yeah, I
But
think we
in case
might,
of, in case of, when we deciding the zoning and all that, shouldn't that be more definite rather than potential? That it can be potential anywhere in this, you can make it anything potential. But the thing is, if you are making R1, that means it's R1 zone. R2 is R2 zone. It's not potential R1 or potential R2.
yeah, I think in terms of the current words in the language, I'm not necessarily in the general plan. I think it is a little bit vague. And,
is.
you know, if there's a series of uses that can be considered, you know, and as to be implemented through a PD, if you want to list resident, and we can come back with some different language in general that sort of maybe lays this out a little differently and a little more clearly. I'd be glad to do that as part of this next go-around. I think we could look at some different language. But the idea is I think the policy question is when when someone comes in to get a PD permit, and since the zoning for a PD permit is very non-specific as to what you could come in with, they're going to revert back to the general plan. So an applicant could say, okay, here's a list of potential uses on this in the general plan. And they can come in with any one of those, right? And their proposal could technically be consistent with the general plan. So if you want residential to be one of those things, someone could potentially come in with a PD application. That's the policy question. We might want to come in and establish some better parameters in terms of, because what this is completely lacking is a density.
Right.
You know, does that mean
Yeah.
you want 2 acre units to the acre or 72 units to the acre? There's no guidance in this sort of consider language. So,
Right.
so you know, that would be the thing. If you want to do, kind of provide a little more guidance, you know, it's sort of two-tiered. One is if you want to consider residential, you know, we leave that in as a potential use or a use that can be considered. But then if you do want to retain it, then maybe put some parameters as to what is that form or the kind of normal general plan intensity, density that happens in any other residential zone in Brisbane that you have, or even in the general plan, it has these general categories, you know, between X and Y dwelling units per acre is considered acceptable for this zoning or this general plan designation. So that might be something we would bring back for the
Yeah.
commission's consideration when we come back. Again, this is just a workshop. It's something to talk about, and we'll come back in a formal hearing to flesh this out more.
okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Any other questions or?
this is one.
Yes, I have a question. The designation for the northernmost area as utilities, I don't have it in front of me, the exact nomenclature, but since PG&E has what's described as a 5.84 acre strip that goes through Levinson, other than what I read as being potentially a means to expedite any type of business or office construction expansion of PG&E up by the 7 Mile House, why would you want to create a totally exclusive zoning area there instead of just leaving it commercial? If you have utilities running through 2 other sub areas is what I'm asking.
Yeah, I guess we look at that as not the facilities in Martin are not a transmission line per se. It's a standalone facility with that in our, you know, we'd have no information that would lead us to believe that PG&E is going to vacate that site as a substation and the other ancillary buildings that they actually construct on that site, which is very different than a power line, which again, you could potentially do uses in that area or under that power line potentially. This property is going to be devoted for PG&E purposes, and the idea of the general plan, we felt it's more useful if it accurately reflects the character and nature and use of an area, as opposed to, if 3% of the land area is devoted potentially to commercial or retail uses, acknowledge what that other 97% of the land is used for as part of the general plan. That was our thought process.
I guess my concern is that by characterizing it, which enables PG&E to expedite any construction or alterations, is that necessarily a good idea?
I'm not sure that it expedites anything that PG&E does out there. I'm not aware that it's recognizing the uses. You would find that most of what PG&E does out there on Martin, there are provisions in the public utility codes that preempt city zoning regulations over their essential uses. So the city, from a land use planning, zoning, design, the typical things the commission reviews, we're typically preempted by the state utilities code from engaging in or subjecting the PG&E to those kind of requirements.
And I have a second question. Since I'm the newest planning commissioner, I noticed a notation on page H122. The very bottom paragraph notes that it was the consensus of the commission that separate zoning districts were warranted for the different areas within the Northwest Bayshore sub-area. So my question is about the phrase that follows, and that the specific plan should be separate from the plan development requirements. Was that in fact a consensus reached by the commission?
So there was not a formal motion, as this was a study session in January, it was not a formal motion, but that's what staff understood as the direction was to consider essentially separating out the specific plan from the plan development, but they also indicated they wanted more information.
Okay, maybe my fellow commissioners could address that.
What did you want to know?
I'm asking if in fact, where it says the consensus was, I'm paraphrasing here now, consensus of the commission that the specific plan should be separate from plan development requirements. Was that a consensus actually reached by the planning commissioners in January 2017?
I believe it was. The first part I definitely remember.
And is that implying that the specific plan should be removed from the priority development zoning and general plan?
No, it means they should be done separately.
Because the paperwork we've been given asks for 2 amendments, one to the general plan and also one to the zoning. And part of the materials that I've read through thoroughly indicates that specific plans are somewhat redundant in terms of plan developments, that the Brisbane Municipal Code is far more detailed than what the state would require in a specific plan. However, I also have noted some other interesting facts regarding specific plans. And so it leads me to ask whether a specific plan triggers an EIR. And also in terms of the property areas in that Levinson Central area, for example, the information we were given about specific plans says that it's relevant for anything from 1 acre to 2,800 acres. So I don't think that the consideration should necessarily be the size of the site. Also, Brisbane being fairly keyed into sustainable and ecological and retaining this community character, the information we were given about specific plans says that it many times allows a community to have detailed plans with environmental policies, programs, and goals to defined areas. So that would be something given up if we negated the specific plan. Also, that usually with specific plans, community is more involved. It says that specific plans are adopted by City Council by resolution or ordinance, and then they might be subjected to voter initiative and referendum, which simply means that if the community doesn't like the ordinance or resolution, they can overturn it. You take away specific plan, you give that right up completely. Also, the specific plan process, opportunities for the public to assist in the planning. Obvious downsides are the time, data collection. But I also found it interesting in part of the paperwork that we have, it talks about the quarry and the baylands. If someone comes through and wants to develop, they would have to submit under present day zoning and the general plan, they would have to submit a specific plan. So if we in fact amend to take that out of the zoning, that's no longer required, which means someone could come in, submit a plan under a simple plan development without a specific plan. And the same for the baylands after the hearings are done. Someone could come through without a specific plan and just submit a plan development.
Just to respond to that, both the quarry, in the general plan, under both the quarry and the baylands, there's a requirement for a specific plan. So just taking it out of the zoning will not affect the requirement under the general plan for a specific plan for the baylands or the quarry. I want to make that clear.
Okay.
Could you review why we were asked to remove that from the zoning? I don't remember exactly how that went. It's a little confusing.
It's a little, and John can fill in what I might leave off, but it's a bit unusual for essentially a lower order regulatory document such as the zoning ordinance to refer then to a higher order, and so it becomes this sort of a circular thing where so the policy language is policy language that Commissioner Mackin refers to can be readily covered within a general plan. And so a specific plan can be, it's not a requirement, but if a city chooses, it can be kind of a bridge, if you will, that goes between a general plan and zoning and can provide more detailed policy language. And so usually there would be some sort of connection as to why you want to have a specific plan, and staff is at a bit of a loss to find that connection, what we would be seeking out of that specific plan. So the result is that it becomes a source of uncertainty for somebody looking to actually develop the site, that okay, I need to go through the very specific requirements that are provided in the plan development, but at the same time, I'm going through all this work and expending that money to do those detailed kind of plans. But I don't know that the city actually even wants this, because as she mentioned, it is a legislative act. The planned development, though, also goes to City Council for review, and so it's not. I don't see it as an issue where the city is giving up control. But if there are specific policies that we think need to be included, that the general plan would be a good place to put those, unless there's a compelling reason why we think that we need to have a specific plan here.
I'm still confused what you're explaining.
I guess to put it kind of simply from a practitioner standpoint, that a specific plan and a PD permit are both discretionary tools that provide the planning commission and the city a fine-grained level of control over a development, as opposed to creating kind of broader zoning standards and, you know, minimum setback and height, et cetera, et cetera. They're both very fine-grained tools to do that. And what's unusual is to apply both of those tools to the same piece of ground. Because if you're going to do a specific plan, you've gone through that fine-grained planning exercise. It wouldn't appear that you would need to go through a separate fine-grained planning exercise for a PD permit on the same property that you have applied a specific plan sort of rubric to. So that was really, they're two different tools that are slightly different. As Ken pointed out, our PD permit requirements are slightly more specific in terms of actually more detailed. And as Commissioner Mackin called out and mentioned, you know, specific plan can be beefed up to do these various things. They're not necessarily statutory. They're not spelled out. And so there's a little bit more clarity for an applicant. If they see, okay, a PD permit, I have to do these things. It makes it a little bit more transparent for everybody in terms of what they're required to submit and provide, as opposed to a specific plan. They may submit a specific plan and, you know, well, there are these other elements that aren't mandatory, they're not statutory, but, you know, you need to do X, Y, and Z. And so that was really the problem. We saw two overlapping tools. And given the area involved here, the relatively small physical area of Levinson Peking, which could be developed independently, so you'd be talking about two specific plans potentially. They don't have to be developed together. We felt the PD tool was more suitable for this area. But again, that's something the commission, that's ultimately your call to make.
Is that only because this is a small area, or like if we were going to start the Baylands all over again, would you make the same recommendation for the Baylands?
No, you'd want a specific plan for the Baylands. You want a specific plan for the quarry.
Right. So that's only because this is a small area then.
Well, I'm still confused in that if you're proposing an amendment to the zoning of a priority development area, doesn't that apply to every property that's in a priority development area? Seems like it would, right?
Yes, if we modify the PD zone as suggested here,
Right.
yes, it would apply to
Okay.
those properties.
So I'm looking at page H124, and it says that a specific plan is a step below a general plan. Land use regulatory hierarchy may be used as a tool to implement the general plan in particular geographical areas of a city. And interesting, on number 3, it says bring together policies and regulations into a focused development scheme. And to me, that seems like a real positive asset to have. Not to mention that if instead of this just going before Planning Commission, it would have to be passed, any development would have to be passed by a specific plan by the council. And again, it's subject to recourse by the electorate if they don't like it. But once you give up that specific plan, that's not true anymore. Is that correct? Am I not interpreting this?
In terms of being subject to referendum,
I'm reading
not-
directly from the part in the packet that says here. I'm on page H139 in the back about part 1, the specific plan. And it says, the authority for adoption of a specific plan is vested with the local legislative body. Unlike the general plan, which is required to be adopted by resolution, 2 options are available for the adoption of a specific plan: adoption by resolution or adoption by ordinance. And next paragraph says the adoption of a specific plan is a legislative act similar to adoption of a general plan or zoning ordinance. Therefore, specific plans may be subjected to voter initiative and referenda. So that is a significant difference. Once you remove specific plans,
I
you
think the
give up that right.
I think the difference between plan development and specific plan is basically one point where referendum part of that. Otherwise, they are more or less parallel, pretty similar. So we have to decide where we want that kind of an authority, where we have a area where we think that might be subject to referendum or more controversial, versus the other area that are pretty straightforward. We don't see any kind of a, that's the only thing I can think of between the two, differences between the two. Now, the plan development is also required by the state, or is it just a city required?
There's not, it's not out of the state government code. It's a local tool or local,
A specific plan is,
yes.
okay. So how about if we take the plan development down and just keep the specific plan?
That'll be another way of dealing with it.
And just beef up the specific plan, some of the areas that we
That are
can
unique
change.
to, that are unique to the PD standards that you want to see
And
carried
can
forward.
incorporate
to
in
the
the specific
plan.
that will
Sure.
give us the authority,
We can look at that if that's how you want to.
right? I mean, that will encompass the comprehensive nature of PD plus the concern that we have regarding the referendum and all that.
Sure.
So I just want to clarify, so was that discussed when this decision was made about the consensus? No?
I don't think that we discussed the
Okay.
specific issues of the referenda or voter initiative.
Okay. Because I had a similar question since I was absent and so I was concerned about that too. But I think that Commissioner Munir's suggestion about including the specific plan and taking away the PD addresses the redundancy issue that John is pointing out, so that we have that additional benefit that specific plans carry. If that's
I think the best solution will be to keep the specific plan and just
and
revise the
remove
specific
the-
plan a little bit.
remove the PD.
That, yeah, so remove the PD and make it a specific plan. Because we
Yeah.
don't want too redundant, that was the main concern for bringing it up here,
Absolutely, yes.
okay? Does that satisfy Ms. McKean's concern?
I would like to satisfy all the commissioners, not just Ms. Mack.
But it was one of your concerns, so we want to make sure.
Yes, and also perhaps staff could elaborate for us at some point on page H124, bottom paragraph says, where a city does use specific plan as a planning tool, state law imposes a number of requirements on their contents. So it might be helpful to know what are those requirements as opposed to regular plan development.
They're actually set out in that same exhibit you were referencing.
The one in the back?
Yes,
Okay.
1-40,
Okay.
statutory requirements, A through, well, A1.
Oh,
through
those are
4.
the ones. Okay, thank you very much.
We make a motion to open public hearing at some point.
Yeah, sure. Did we have any more? I just
So is that clarifies that?
wanting to
And
If that's the direction, the sort of, and again, we're not taking votes and there's no formal hearing, so you can take the public's input whenever you like, but we can either make your consensus at the end of the evening, or we can note that and move forward. It's your call.
Can we go back to the area and like to find out, where we divided these zones, which one will, it's a central area. Now, Caltrain station will come in what area? I'm trying to figure it out. It will be part of the northern? Yeah.
That's east. That's not within any of this area. That's actually
We are
within the
not,
Baylands.
we are not discussing that tonight.
Correct.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Because some point
Sorry.
we are saying northern, and northern encompasses that part also, versus northwest versus northern versus. So
Yeah,
the
normally,
Caltrain will be what?
that would be in the Baylands, actually. Is his own general plan sub-area. It's not within the northwest. There is another northeast Bayshore sub-area, but it's not within that either. It lies within the Baylands sub-area.
So we are not looking at north or northeast.
Correct.
When we're going to do that next meeting?
No, that would be whatever the council direction applies to the Baylands overall, since the Baylands development application includes northeast Bayshore. Their decision
does?
will- yes, it will address that as well.
Go ahead, please.
I just had I don't want to speak too specifically to this issues tonight because I haven't read up on them, but I do have a general sort of philosophical statement that has occurred to me more than just once. And by way of example, the websites I find the hardest to use are the ones that have super critical pieces of information only in one place. And I think building, and I want to apply that analogy to building code and regulations. If there's something important and you really wanted to see it happen, then I think redundancy is good. I don't think you need to fear redundancy. And I sort of worry about sweeping up things because if at some point somebody else decides to remove that last remaining vestige of redundancy, then all of a sudden you've lost your control. So my personal inclination is to just leave it redundant, because that way if one thing gets changed, it's still somewhere else, and I think it gives us more safety and more control as a citizenry about what happens in the future. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you.
Now redundancy in terms of what? Running the parallel similar analysis twice?
Well, sure, if that's what it takes, they can cut and paste it over to the other document. That's not hard. Or they can do one document that's slightly more complicated and fulfills the requirements of both. Or whatever. There's a number of different ways it can be dealt with, and if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. It's happened on occasion. But like I said,
we all are wrong at some
yeah,
point. So
yeah. So I just, this fear of redundancy to me seems a little misplaced. Okay, thanks.
okay.
Do we have any more items for discussion for this workshop?
Well, part of what we were supposed to look at also is the zoning designations in the 3 sub-areas, and I really would like to hear everyone's thoughts on that. Do you want me to start?
Yeah.
Okay, in the north, I'm not adverse to the utility designation. I cringe a little bit when we start making all these exclusive little areas with different names. The southernmost portion near the technology park near Guadalupe, and rezoning that to TC1, I think is absolutely perfect logic, because you go across the road, you're in Crocker. It just makes sense. It's already there. It's not a planned development. The development's there. That to me, I think, is a no-brainer. And in the central area, leaving it PD, to me, that just makes sense. In the northern part, to go from M1 to commercial, that makes sense. It's my thoughts.
I agree.
I don't think there's a
We
dis-
all agree.
Somebody disagree, please.
Well, not if you're reasonable. We
Well,
should
I
be.
I
We should.
appreciate staff's paperwork on this, all of the thinking, examining it, because it just made it much easier to assimilate this very, very complex
Very dense.
state of conditions, yeah.
Yeah. very
But the
dense.
designation plan development, again, we're not doing the plan development, we doing the specific plan, not the,
Well, if the zoning's PD,
So-
then what do you call the zoning if you
Right.
take away the PD?
Right, I mean,
is there any different name we can come up with? Because we're not doing the plan development.
Yeah, I think would come up with zoning that's, a title that's more reflective of the process. So,
Yeah.
and if you want a specific plan as modified to incorporate additional PD level detail, we'll come up with a different title that's more,
Yeah,
Accurately.
that should be, because we're not doing plan development anymore. So,
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I just don't know what to call it.
yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
we'll do that.
when this comes back, we'll have some other language and you can review it and modify it as you see fit.
thank you, sir.
And through the chair, if I may go back to one of Commissioner Mackin's questions, you asked about a EIR and whether that was tied to a
Thank you.
specific plan. It's actually not. It's tied to the project. So whether it's the project is governed by a specific plan or by a PD, so you would, because it's within the Habitat Conservation Plan area, we're triggering CEQA initial study, which would essentially work out whether that would be a negative declaration, mitigated negative declaration, or rise to the level of a EIR. So that's independent of specific plan. Or
I think the EIR has its own requirements. Any project that has those elements, they have to do the EIR. It has nothing to do with specific plan or not. Even for a smaller project, sometimes you require EIR, a single family home, for example. So it's governed by the CEQA requirements, more or less. Am I correct?
Anything else? Nope, okay. So, items initiated by the staff.
Oops, sorry. I think as Ken mentioned, the previous M1 resolution at Southeast Bayshore will be going to council in April. I believe the medical marijuana regulations will go to council in April as well. And again, the Baylands hearings are ongoing. So that's all I have.
Items initiated by the commission.
Yes, I have something. Some months ago, I wanted to agendize a discussion about lot coverage and maximum building size in central Brisbane. And we decided to postpone that until we had the new set of commissioners selected, which we now have. And we also wanted to have that discussion at some point when all of us were here, and may not be able to predict exactly when that was, but I was wondering if we were ready to schedule it and hope for the best in terms of attendance.
I'm open to that.
I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, it is a good idea. And I have one item regarding the Bayshore Boulevard. I read somewhere that they're going to do an extensive work on that. I guess they currently is just a slurry. They're going to put bring it to the Caltrain station. Do you know any time frame for that, and would that affect any of the signaling and all of that stuff?
I'm sorry, you're saying they're going to,
There, I read it in next door, one of those, you know, and they were talking about that the Bayshore will have extensive work done because currently it's not up to this.
the Bayshore
And-
Caltrain station?
not
Hold in
Bayshore
place
level.
recycling of the roadway he's talking about.
Oh, okay. I haven't heard when that program, or it would be a public works project. I could certainly get you some information in terms of when it might start and how long they think it'll be, if that's of interest or not. I wouldn't agendize it, but I could just send it off to the commissioners.
The reason I asked that is if that might be an appropriate time to think about providing a sidewalk to that area along the Bayshore, because there's a residential and mixed use area there, and we had concerns when we were looking at I think one of the property, Mr. Chung, the one with what's his name, the village, the owner of the village,
Charles Ing.
Charles Sang, yeah. His property also, we were looking at how we're going to accommodate the sidewalks and all that. So if that project comes up, I think it might be appropriate for the planning staff to bring that up for the future development of homes or whatever along that zone.
Okay, we'll have that conversation with the Public Works.
You know what I'm talking about, right? I mean,
Yeah, the other thing, I guess I didn't jump back to staff items is, I guess, with the Parkside plan is in a preliminary draft form, and we're trying to get that finalized in the next several weeks. And again, that may address some of the issues right around the village, certainly, and the Bayshore street frontage. So the commission may have the opportunity to deal with that directly in the guise of under that Parkside plan, so at least make recommendations on that issue.
okay. Thank you.
Okay. So,
Oh, sorry, we have one
go
more. So as we communicated to you guys, we wanted to hold a recognition ceremony for our former commissioners, Dave Reinhardt and Carolyn Parker. And they've indicated they are available April 13th. It's your next meeting. So what we'd prefer to do is have it occur before the meeting. So we just want to make sure if you guys are all available that evening at, say, 7, so a half hour earlier than usual. And you can, of course, let us know by email if that ultimately doesn't work, but that's what we're planning. So we'll have a mini reception and the resolutions that you all saw already. And
I'll be there unless I don't finish my tax returns.
Okay.
So, next up is the selection of planning commission officers. But again, I'm noting that we're missing someone, and we had mentioned that it was something that we're a team here. So we would like to have everyone here when we make that selection.
Yeah, we've been
So we can
postponing
continue that. That would be great. So before we adjourn, let me read the appeals process. Anyone may appeal the action of the Planning Commission to the City Council, except where specified otherwise. Appeals shall be filed with the City Clerk no later than 15 calendar days following the Planning Commission's decision. An application form and fee is required to make a formal appeal. For additional information, please contact the City Clerk at 415-508-2110. So,
I think that the chairman seat has a crazy glue for you. So it doesn't want to let you go.
So now can we make a motion for adjournment to our next regular meeting of April 13th?
I move that we adjourn our meeting tonight until the next regular meeting of April 13th
I
at 7
second
p.m.
that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Good night.